Mona's been around for quite some time, so today I thought it'd be fun to evaluate her current meta position. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. We'll start off with her kit field to evaluate how she feels to use nowadays. We'll be evaluating her performance in Mualani, Navia, Ayaka, Ganyu, and Raiden Shogun teams. She may have more, but these are the teams I'm gonna focus on for this video. In Mualani teams, she's able to provide her massive Omen buff to allow one of the Shark Surfer's normal attacks to completely shred the enemies because of how much buffing it's given. She also doesn't apply all that much Hydro, so your vapes don't get ruined too badly. Plus, if you're using a pyro like Xiangling, she applies a frick ton of flames, so you should be fine on the front of consistent vaping. Unfortunately, the use of somebody like Toma wouldn't work, because even if he is able to vape, there won't be any pyro aura left, so the Leo as Chef is a requirement. The main issue of Mona here is that she doesn't buff every hit of the Shark Surfer during her surfing uptime, but because the buff is so large, it makes up for it well enough. I do think that Candace is far more consistent in this team, and because of Mona's ER needs, she can feel a bit finicky in this team. But hey, she is indeed a viable alternative final slot here. You're also able to use her for big damage per screenshot Navia nukes. I don't think she is the most consistent choice for this team, especially because you'd rather use characters with more consistent elemental application for the sake of generating more crystal shrapnel. Even so, because Navia has a very nuke-heavy playstyle, you can get some funny numbers with the Omen buff. We have more consistent and cheap options, such as this Navia double pyro team comprised of only 4-star characters, but even so, it's a pretty fun way to play. Once again, you just want to make sure you've got enough ER. Ayaka is one of Mona's most long-lasting synergies that has existed since day number 1. She's always been pretty solid when it comes to boss content in my opinion, because while Kokomi's AoE Hydro application is better for freeze, Mona provides a stronger buff to Ayaka's front load thanks to Omen. You could run TDDS on Mona here, but I highly doubt that most people have enough ER to run that comfortably. I'll say that I prefer Kokomi once again for her consistency, and because she can use TDDS without any issue of ER. You're more likely to run Prototype Amber Mona for consistent bursting and sustenance if she is the only possible healer in your team. I'm assuming Shenhe is the final slot in these scenarios. Lady Farina is also relevant thanks to the massive damage bonus % boost she can provide. However, then you have to use Charlotte instead of Shenhe as your 4th slot. I find that Mona feels more comfortable to use with Ayaka and single target, but I prefer other options in AoE or against freezable enemies. Ganyu and Mona is the most ancient synergy on the planet. It's not really used anymore, since if you're playing Ganyu in the Abyss, then you're most likely playing Melt. It's so boss-centric nowadays that this primarily AoE-only team doesn't have much going for it. This synergy will work well in Freeze Imaginarium Theaters or Venti Shill Abysses. Otherwise, chances are you're probably not playing this team anymore. Raiden Nuke is one of the most sustainable ways to play Mona because her massive ER needs don't feel as bad. Plus, much like Ayaka, because the Almighty Shogun has such a short DPS window, she's able to benefit from most of the Omen buff. Her initial slash also enjoys quite the buff. I think this is the team where Mona feels the smoothest to play, while also feeling rather effective. This helps make using TDDS on her far easier too, since ER isn't as scarce of a resource here. She's a nice substitute hyper buffer if you don't have Kujo Sora or other solid hyper buffers. Is it best in slot? No, not by any means, but it definitely doesn't feel too bad. Mona's a case of needing quite a chunky amount of ER to feel good in numerous teams. I find that slapping a high amount of ER alongside an R5 prototype Amber takes care of most things. She feels good to use with all the nuke-based characters that do large short blasts of damage. While she may not necessarily be best in slot in any of these comps, she can still feel like a fun unit to use for goofy damage per screenshot shenanigans, while having a decent amount of consistency in Raiden teams. I do think she's worth your time in Ayaka teams too if you're not using Kokomi or Farina already. I'd also like to briefly cover her alternate sprint. Back in the day, this was one of the fastest ways to get around, but nowadays with characters such as Xian, Yun, and Wanderer, her fast travel isn't as nuts anymore. It's still good, but better options do exist. Still a useful mechanic either way. You can use it in the Abyss to quickly travel to enemies on the other side of the arena. Otherwise, since she has such a short field time, you're rarely going to be needing to use her alternate sprint in the first place. Naturally, you're going to lose your 50-50 to her a few times over a long time of playing. And she'll also be available for free once per year from the standard 5-star anniversary selector. So why don't we discuss the importance of these cons? This C1 is a neat little buff, simply speaking. Some cool buffs to every Hydro reaction, but to be honest, you'll only find this useful in Mualani teams. Otherwise, you won't be affected by this much. Unfortunately, while this had the potential to be good in Freeze teams, the duration extension is bugged and sadly will not work. Her C2 mostly allows you to try your hand at a DPS driver Mona. This is nowhere near as good as using literally any of her main DPS, so I suggest steering clear of his playstyle unless Mona is your favorite waifu ever. Your Omen buff caps out at level 10 at 60%, so the +3 to your ult is basically only for her personal damage. Otherwise, it's not that useful. At most, it will allow you to keep her ult at level 7 and have the con bring it up to level 10, which saves you a crown and quite a lot of useful resources. Pretty nice crit rate increase. This won't matter much for the Freeze ladies because Blizzard Strayer gives them so much rate already, not to mention how there's other sources of crit rate in Freeze teams, such as Cryo Resonance or teammates such as Rosaria. However, this will be really nice for characters such as Raiden, Shogun, or Navia who have a good portion of damage in one large blast. They could use the consistency. In any case, not a bad C4. More levels to your skill doesn't mean anything because you'll find that her skill doesn't do much in the first place. The +3 doesn't really upgrade the taunting aspect of the ability. Unfortunately, her C6 leans more into your DPS playstyle as opposed to your support playstyle, so once again, unless you're a Mona simp, this Constellation ain't gonna do much for you. Mona's Constellations are far from a must. I'd say that her C1 and C4 are the most influential to your main playstyles. If you're a huge Mona fanatic, then yes. Picking her C1 next anniversary is a fine enough upgrade if you play her with Mualani. But if you're not big on the astrologist, then I wouldn't prioritize her upgrades. You can most definitely do without these cons. She works fine right out of the box at C0. I do wish she had some cons to help with her energy issues. Something like that would have been much better for her C2 or C6 in my opinion. But hey, as it stands, C0 is all you need. Nice. Mona's existed since the very beginning of Genshin Impact, so her full meta history goes way, way back. Morgana is the team that she was primarily famous for playing in back then. Looking cool, Mona. The team was named after something else, but I personally think of the Persona 5 cat when that comp is brought up. Anyways, it was one of the best teams in the game right up until Freeze fell off. Its ability to work in mobbing content was wild, and Mona was a truly useful unit back in the golden years of Freeze. Ayaka eventually rose to become Ganyu's main competition throughout this time, and because people didn't really value Kokomi all that much until people realized that you could just play her as a Hydro off-fielder without her ult, and of course until Bloom rolled around, Mona remained as the primary Freeze option for most people. Plus, healers weren't as demanded back then. It was either you used Freeze to immobilize your foes, or you used a shielder to prevent any damage from happening in the first place. Rift Hounds weren't a big enough threat to totally shift healers into favor, so the astrologist faced little competition for quite some time. Raiden Shogun also gave her another neat use case, which is viable even to this day. It was an especially neat synergy before Yelan came out, though regular Rational of Shengqiu was always more popular. Even so, this was still a pretty good choice to make. When Freeze began to fall, so too did Mona, unfortunately. She lost a lot of her positive reputation and slowly drifted into obscurity as we traveled further and further away from the glory days of Freeze teams. However, Mona has regained a bit of relevancy in the current day. Definitely not a lot, and her use cases are nowhere near as strong as they used to be, but they do exist. Thanks to Mualani being so flexible with her potential teammates, Mona's able to slot herself in as a usable 4th slot. While Candace is certainly a more consistent pick, it's still nice that actual use cases for her exist again. She also gained Navia as a potential use case, but she's not that good for generating Crystal Shrapnel consistently. You'll find that Mona is more of a Bennett replacement in these teams, as she is able to lower our beloved Lady Farina's ER requirements, while also providing her with Hydro Resonance, which is useful thanks to the extra HP percent. If you can manage ER requirements just fine, then she can hold TDDS for additional Navia buffing as well. The Spina Leader's first 2 skill nukes will also be buffed by Mona's Omen. It's definitely something that works. Mona doesn't really have that much of a meta presence anymore. I wouldn't call her unusable garbage. She has the places in which she functions quite nicely, and she can in fact contribute to the teams which you slot her into. If you can manage Mona's rough ER requirements, then she can put in some good work. I don't think her meta position is going to change much. Farina is obviously a much better Hydro damage bonus percent buffer than her, who has far more consistency. With that being said, she isn't too bad for a standard unit whatsoever. While she has definitely dropped from being one of the best standards to one of the less valuable ones, you can absolutely make her work if you so wish. She is always going to be decent for nuke-based characters that do the main beat of their damage in one very quick blast. Otherwise, you definitely won't be using her in teams that ask for a longer buff up time. Her Omen buff is definitely still quality, and some of her older synergies remain as not being half bad, but I definitely wouldn't choose to raise her over the likes of Ji, Diluc, Tainari, Keqing, or even Dia if you're looking at the entire standard character roster. It's nice to see that she gained some usability in a Natlan team, means that there are finally some modern applications for her again. Ultimately, with Mona, you know what you're getting yourself into. She provides a very specific service in teams, otherwise you won't find her to be that useful. She absolutely had her time, and it's not like Mona has been left with zero value. I think it's fine that she's not all that relevant nowadays. However, it'd definitely be nice to see her get introduced into some more modern teams again. I've had Mona on my radar for quite a while, and really wanted to cover her for quite some time since I do like the character quite a bit. While she's certainly not all that impressive in the meta anymore, I greatly enjoy her design quality and English voice acting. I'd personally love to see her come back in some way, but with how strong the top buffers in this game currently are, I doubt that she'll be best in slot in any new teams anytime soon. I do appreciate when she is able to slot into a team, however, since variety is the spice of life after all. But what do you think of Mona? Do you think she's permanently cooked? Or do you see some potential in her that's just waiting to shine? Let me know down below in the comments. Hopefully this video was able to update you on Mona's current position in the Genshin Impact meta. This has been Juice, signing out, and the best thing about Mona is that she has a really cool hat.